Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bridge Cultures. My name is Virginia Reed. I'm a volunteer from ISIC. Today we have a special event and a special conference. It's about conscientiologists in Australia. So we have a big team with us that are going to discuss about their experience in Australia. So let's start because we have a big team. Jeffrey Lloyd, please, if you can start presenting all the people. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here today to be part to this activity. So let's start. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thanks, Virginia, and thanks for the invitation to present. And obviously, thank you to everyone who wants to present here today. So we've got Kim McCall, who's in Adelaide. Mashiko and Fernandez Frioli, they are also down in Adelaide. Mashiko originally came from Hawaii. Fernandez is from Brazil. And Kim, I think you were born in Germany, if I remember correctly, right? Now you're essentially Australian.
Right. That's where I grew up.
Yeah, you're more or less Aussie, like me now, right? And then we have João and Magali and Tatiana. And João Mariyama was born in Sao Paulo, if I remember correctly. And Magali, I have absolute certainty she was born in Sao Paulo. And Tatiana Mota was from Manaus in Brazil, I think. And we're all now here in Australia. So for different reasons and at different moments. But thank you everyone for joining in the talk. And it's going to be a really rich talk. So all of us are going to be talking about different pieces and different parts of the puzzle. So we'll be just doing a brief introduction as we're doing right now, and then we'll jump right into it. And the themes we're going to discuss, you can see on the screen there: Holocene energy, evolutionary advances and challenges, sort of more high level kinds of things. We wanted to talk briefly about Indigenous peoples in Australia because it's a really rich area to talk about and really relevant for Australia. And then there's a bit about self-research and self-recycling, and then goes sort of a bit with Penta as well. And then there's a few projects we're involved in, and perhaps we might have time to discuss and brainstorm a few other possibilities for the future as well. So that's what we're going to do today. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to our first presenters, which are going to be Magali and Tatiana, and they're going to talk about the Holocene. Enjoy.
Okay, I'll jump first. So here, the Holocene, I thought instead of just what I think about it, I just did a research to put together how the world see Australia and how Australia see themselves. And then we can compare with our experience in Australia, because we all having experience here. So, and I tried to separate all these, like the first is health. So what I found is that 12 happiest countries in the world by UN, United Nations. The 8th best country to live according to the Human Development Report, UN also. So longevity, Australia's life expectancy at birth was 82.8 years. So it's close to the Japanese. Now the Japanese is the best one, and it's 84, if I don't mistake. So it's the 7th highest among other countries. So security, Australia ranked 4th Global Health Security Index. What does it mean? It means that Australia cope with the health system is good enough to cope with health problems, with risk problems. They do a lot of research on that to come to this index. Okay, next one, please. Conviviality. Oh, Openness. So Australia is being said to be a multicultural nation in the world, the second most multicultural nation in the world. And it's interesting because 30% of Australians are born overseas. Tolerance. The top 10 least racist countries in the world. Assistance. Australia ranked 4th in the commitment to develop index. So that provides measures level of state contribution to global development through a variety of facts. Even now with the vaccination as other countries and with a lot of others assistance. Okay. Next. Cosmoethics. I put cosmoethics, but here is inside what we can see seeds of cosmoethic in the world, right? Freedom, ranking 8th in the world's freedom index. That is based on political rights and civil liberties. Ethic is on the list of the less corrupt countries in the world. Democracy. Australia is considered a full democracy with a global democracy ranking score 9.09 out of 10. Is the 9th ranking 9th. The next one. Cosmovision. Here is the vision. No, I put cosmovision, but how is the vision of Australia? So beliefs. It is among the least religious countries in the world, considered as a spiritual, non-religious country. Education. It is on the list of the countries with the best education system. Planetary consciousness is considered above the average, ranking the 13th in the review of cleanest country in the world. Okay, next one. So how Australia see themselves? Self-perception. Respondents to Australian Talks National Survey were asked, if you had to choose up to 3 words that best capture aspects of your identity that are most important to you, what would they be? Honesty, caring, and friendly. I find it interesting here, just a comment about honesty, because we went to a party here in the neighborhood, and an Australian was talking to me, and he said, you know, we Australia, it's really important to be honest. It's a big offense if you say to someone, you know, you're not honest. It's all about honesty, he was talking to me, and he is one Australian that has been traveling the world. So, and I find it interesting because here is a survey and people is saying that, you know? And then we can discuss if us that we are here, we find that has to do with what Australia say about themselves is what we see about them.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because those ideas build trust, right? Like honesty, and if you're caring and you're friendly, that helps build like a more trusting society, which I think is something you can perceive here as well.
That's true, yeah. So in the spirituality, the number of Australians identify as spiritual but not religious that is an expression that they found here, and that is spiritual but not religion. So I'm spiritual but not religion. That is really good. Is growing. So, and you can see this in several contexts. I will show you in the next slide. No. Yes. So here is a mystical experience. More than a quarter of Australian report having had a mystical or supernatural experience. So that is good because it's coherent with the idea that of Australia that we have, what we are experiencing here. After we can comment more about that, but most of our neighbors, we can talk about them, about out-body experience, multiple existence, spirituality, energy. So it's so incredible. Then we can talk later how that is our experience, right? Can you pass the other one? Okay. So Australia Generation Z study. That study is really good study. I will, if you're interested to know more, is a study that provide a powerful insight into how teenagers are make sense of the world around them. So first, all what we saw before, in that study, we can see that the ranking is increasing because like tolerance is like the teenagers is more tolerant to migration, more, you know, you see in their phrases and in their answers in the survey. So I just captured that slides because they ask the teenagers about that too. So the beliefs in here is and Kim was just comment before, like karma. 50% of them believe in karma, but in reincarnation, 29. How can you have karma without reincarnation? Maybe because it is still something that they feel in this life. That is something like, you know, what you do, you receive. No, and there is even a phrase there. That's really good. I think there is another one. I think that's it. I just want to present that first, and then we can talk more later about those points.
Tatiana was going to speak to this as well, right?
Yes.
So can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute here. So hi, everyone. It's great to be here talking about Australia and sharing my experience with you guys. In terms of Holocene, it's really interesting what Magali has presented, because this really gives a foundation of what we have actually, what I have actually perceived here in Australia. So just to summarize a little because of the time, so I'm going to share with you some feelings I've had in terms of the Holocene in Australia. The first one, of course, is related to energy. So since Australia is a pretty young country with nowadays 26 million people, it's not a lot of people. So this makes a huge difference in terms of the Holocene. I was talking to Sandy, who was actually planning to participate as well, but she unfortunately wasn't able anymore because of work. And she was telling me she used to live in Europe for many years, and she's Australian. And she was telling, sharing with me her experience living in Europe, where, you know, the old continent with so many situations that happen in history, wars, religion, all kinds of stuff. And here in Australia, she feels the energy, the immanent energy, much stronger than in Europe, for example. For me as a Brazilian, I really noticed, at least in Cairns, where I live now, which is a small town in the tropical Australia, and I really can feel immanent energy, and everything is really strong. The power of the energy, you know, the birds are huge, the crocs are huge, the plants are huge, colorful, the green is really green, the insects are big, and you know, when they bite you, it hurts really bad. So everything is really strong in terms of energy, at least here where I live. The second aspect I wanted to share with you guys is actually related to what Magali said in terms of corruption. So everything in Australia, or people are educated to respect others since childhood, to be very polite. And I think this comes from maybe the British, you know, background. I don't know, I need to do some more research about it, but it's really different because I used to live in the US for some time in the past, and my sister lives there. I have a more I used to have a closer connection to America than anywhere else. So it's really interesting to me to feel that in Australia, it's sort of like part of the UK. There are many British people living here. The English they speak is different from the American English. The food, they have programs on TV that are from the UK. They talk about the royal family all the time. Everyone knows what's going on in the UK. And this is really interesting because it is actually for me the first time I have a closer connection in this lifetime with this Holocene. So it's pretty interesting to me. And the last thing, just to summarize, because I have a lot of stuff, but I'm not gonna talk now. We can debate later. Is about the Australians being open to interaction with multicultures. Even though in Brazil, we are, at least in Foz do Iguaçu, where I used to live, we were interacting with different cultures, but they were actually separated in their own, you know, groups. And here in Australia, I have actually had the chance to interact with people from different countries everywhere, at work, friends, colleagues, you know, if you go to neighbors, if you go anywhere, you are able to interact with multiple cultures, which is really interesting. And I guess these are the main things I want to share with you guys, at least now, because of the time.
Thanks, Tachi. That's really interesting. Perhaps we'll move on to the next subject now, which is one around energy. And Kim and I are going to talk to this more, but we've got plenty of time. So if other people want to contribute things as we go through, and we've only got one slide, so there's not a lot that we've laid out here, but hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion. So, and this is an interesting one, right? So, I mean, there's two major, I suppose, categories we could divide things to in Australia. So you got the remote areas, which is what here we call the outback. So, you know, outback is basically the rural areas or the very remote areas, so not anything to do with cities or urban areas. And there, Kim, I'll be interested to ask and see what you say around a few of your experiences. It's obviously a really abundant amount of immanent energies, and that also touches and carries on from what Tatiana was observing in relation to her experience and the energies of the Holocaust. So, you know, here we've got, like, we're surrounded by the ocean. Well, not all the people, but the majority of the people live in the coastal regions, so relatively close to the beach, to the ocean. So you got the Pacific Ocean, you got the Indian Ocean on the left, and then you got the above Australia, you've got like the more tropical climes, and I think there's other seas and oceans up there, the Coral Sea and the likes as well. So we're surrounded by a lot of intense activity in relation to the ocean. We don't have a lot of mountains, although there are still some, but we have a very diverse range of terrain and temperatures and climates and regions in Australia, from like the very tropical north, where Tatiana is, way up the north in Cairns, where you've got tropical rainforests, and obviously Australia is really famous for its deserts as well. And then so that's the full range, kind of like Brazil in many regards, I suppose, in that way as well. But we also have very cold areas. Melbourne in winter, cold. Tasmania in winter, well, cold. But Kim, I'm curious, in terms of your experience, because I know you've been out and about to all sorts of diverse areas, is there anything you want to share in relation to energies, in relation to those kinds of experiences you've had?
Yeah, so I think it's really good to emphasize that point again about how most of us are clustered around the coast. You've got this vast country, massive country, and 95% of the population are all sitting on the beaches and on the coast around this empty, in the scheme of things, vast inland area. And that's also quite an interesting shift from thinking about Australia before colonisation, where there was a much more even spread of people, even throughout the desert regions and so on. There was Aboriginal peoples spread throughout the country and occupying it, every part of it. But in terms of the energy, it's an interesting thing, because we look at the outback, and especially if you come from Europe, or probably most other places, but coming from Europe as I did, I'd never experienced that kind of space. And I remember the first time ever driving on outback roads, and after 2 hours of seeing literally nothing but bush, starting to get I noticed this anxiety starting, because I hadn't experienced not seeing anything human, anything man-made, and I was waiting for the town or something over the next horizon, and it didn't come. And you have those open skies at night where you can see the stars all the way to the horizon, because there's no artificial lights, and just this vast spaciousness of energy. So it seems at first sight very pure, I suppose, like a source of this hardly perturbed energy. But there has actually been quite a lot of energetic stigmatization and also environmental stigmatization, because there is, even though we don't have the history of the wars, and we don't have the history of over like one people coming over and invading, and then another, as we have in Europe, when colonization, there's two levels. I think first of all, there is the actual level of European colonization, in which there are these pockets of where massacres happened and sites where atrocities occurred, and sometimes you go there and it becomes noticeable. But there is also the fact that there was a people there for a really long time, 50,000, 60,000, some are even dates going back to 80,000 years now. And from what we know, those people were doing more or less the same things, right? The culture was very, very stable. And so you had the same Holocene centered on this area for an incredibly long time. And so you go to certain places, old ceremonial sites, or places where there was a strong population, Aboriginal population, and there is that consciential energy overlaying, even though you might not really think so just looking around.
I've got a question on that, Kim. Like, I just read an article today that was talking about, in North America, an Indian tribe, they had a great place to live, food, all that stuff, all good. But they realized that it was important to have challenges in life. And so although things were still really fine and no apparent need to move, they actually migrated the tribe like every 25 to 30 years to a different area to stimulate the people. So in terms of the stigmatization and how it was done here in Australia, do you know if for example, Aboriginal tribes migrated a bit within sort of their area, or do they very much sort of stay ensconced where they had established, their, I don't know, it's not necessarily called a village, is it? I don't think, but how did they do that? Did they stay put, or did they move around a bit?
Well, there's two levels to that question, I suppose. So the way people lived had an element of movement to it. So people didn't just stay put in one place. They had quite a
bit nomadic, yeah.
Yeah, sort of nomadic, but within. It's not just they just traveled around the country, right? People stayed within an area,
their region, their zone,
and then moved within that area. They might move, like here in Adelaide, for example, people move between the hills and the beach, and the hills and the beach, and then maybe the north and the south within a certain range, which was their sort of terrain. And then sometimes they might meet with other people down on the River Murray for ceremonies and spend a couple of months down there. But they didn't just go pack up and, oh, let's go to Alice Springs, for example, or let's invade that mob over there. So there is no evidence, nothing known about sort of invasions of each other's territory, but there was definitely, warfare, like skirmishy kind of small kinds of disputes that were resorted to with violence.
That's interesting, isn't it, in terms of living, and that Margalit touched on that in the Holocaust thing about conviviality and so on. Like, so even though there was like a little disagreements now and again, but not like as they did in Europe, invasions and massive conflicts and stuff. That's really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And so the stigmatization was like around the traditional sites and stuff, yeah, where rituals and the likes.
Yeah, so there's that element, right? And there is this concept of prohibited sites, prohibited places. And so when you go to those places today, there might still be conscientiologists there who are seeking to enforce this rule that people shouldn't go there. And I don't know if people have heard this, if you guys have heard this, but for example, at Uluru, there is like a space where people send back rocks that they've taken as souvenirs, and then they took those rocks and then they had accidents or they got sick or something happened to them, and then they send it back because there's this idea, and it's an idea that's very prevalent among Aboriginal people here generally, that you shouldn't take stuff from the land. If you do, then the conscientiologists will not be happy and will pursue you.
Interesting.
And I guess the other thing about,
No, I was just going to say, I'm just conscious of the time, it's ticking. I love that idea that you emphasized around the space as well, right? Like, that's the impression I get too. Like, you've got space here to manifest more fully energetically, and it seems things seem more open and easier, just to add and to emphasize again that point.
Yeah.
Even in the urban areas, I suppose time-wise, we should move on to the urban areas. So even the urban areas, they're often way lighter than in Europe, for example, or in some other countries that have had cities there for half a millennia or 2,000 years or more. And we don't have that. We've got a couple of hundred years of being inhabited and maybe 300 years max of cities being around, or 250 maybe, I think it is.
1788 was Sydney was started.
Yeah, so it's about 250, yeah.
Mm.
And so even though nowadays you go into Sydney and I don't enjoy it, like, I mean, there's interesting stuff there, but it's too manic. Like, I complain to my work colleagues and just say, they just call me like it's called me a grumpy old guy when I'm in Sydney, because it's like, I just want to get out of there and get back to where I'm living now, which is essentially much more relaxed, calm, open, spacious, near the ocean, and enjoying nature much more. But we sort of see that in the urban areas. And Kim, what's your thoughts around that area, urban stuff?
Yeah, I think what you said there is pretty much it. There's also this element. I mean, Adelaide is particularly, it was planned. It was a planned city where I am, so it's very spacious, lots of parklands. But really, you have that everywhere. I mean, Sydney, you've got the harbour, which is just this source of imminent energy right in the middle of the city. In Brisbane, you've got all the river and lots of greenery. Melbourne is, for me, probably the most urban kind of European-esque like city, but even there's plenty of green spaces right in the middle of town. So that's been a part. I think Australia's been designed like that, and it just, yeah, it adds to the quality of life.
Yeah, which is something Margalie mentioned as well.
Yeah.
I think on the next slide we I'll keep talking because I've contributed a little bit to this one. So we've got these images represent a few different things, and this is just high-level observations really around what we've seen. So the first image there is like representing climate change, and Australia is a really interesting case study in that regard. And have had a lot of news coverage and a lot of pressure, and rightly so, to sort of change our ways. And the next bit we'll talk about will then Indigenous peoples, and Kim will share more of his knowledge around that. And then lastly, sort of a little bit of the geopolitical area or context of Australia. So the first one around climate change, as our friend shoots through these slides, there we go. There's a lot of positive steps that are happening. A lot of them are driven by individuals and families. So the uptake of household solar panels, so putting solar panels on your roof, is really high. And that just shows a lot of sentiment at the ground level, at the ground, at the base level of the society. People typically are wanting to improve things. And so that sentiment, again, around climate change and so on is changing. And we see a lot here because we, as you see on the other side of the page here, we have a lot of bushfires. We're now having a whole heap of floods. We have coastal erosion happening. The challenges against this, and actually I'll carry on the left just for a moment. The solar farms, so there's some massive solar farms that are being built in Australia. And a really interesting initiative is that they're actually putting a massive cable in, and they're going to be pumping or sending, not pumping, but sending this energy from at least one of these solar farms to Singapore. So it's a really interesting initiative, right? So we've got heaps of open space. We don't have, a lot of trees in the middle of Australia. It's just desert with this shrubby bushes, but you can whack solar panels there. You're basically going to get sunshine, not all day, obviously, there's nighttime, but for a lot of the time. And then we can export that energy. So as opposed to exporting coal, which is dirty and what Australia has done for a long time and got a lot of money from, there's new ways of exporting energy. So it's an interesting thing there. And green hydrogen is something that's really catching up in the news now. Greener ways to produce hydrogen, and hydrogen being a really clean fuel. So for example, if you run your car on hydrogen, you produce water, as opposed to all the toxic fumes that you get out of the current internal combustion engines. So as long as you can make hydrogen cleanly, which they're starting to be able to do more and more, imagine running your car and essentially producing water as the output. I mean, like, great. So there's good initiatives happening, but really stymied to a degree by political arrogance, the inertia, big business, right? So some of the businesses here are massive businesses, and they have invested interests, and they don't want things to change, despite the fact that it would be good for every employee in their business and every person in the world. They still are valuing money above societal concerns and what's best for the planet, which is really egotistical, arrogant, disappointing. You could carry on and all sorts of things. But that was largely what I had to say around climate change. But anyone else? Tatiana, I see you had a few ideas here. I don't know if it was about climate change or about another subject we'll talk about after. On the next slide, I think, the next slide. So Can we go to the next slide? How's that?
Yeah, Kim, I
Touchy
just
there,
wanted
Joe.
to jump in real quick. Just talk about the challenges. I think you certainly see a lot of evidence of those challenges with the big businesses as well. But you know, we also see a lot of positive changes with the big businesses as well. For example, the large mining companies, they've committed to go net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and they're joining together. Competitors are joining together in joint partnerships towards these movements. So yeah, we do
2050,
see.
Mashiko, 2050, it's a long way away. We're talking 2030.
Well, we are
But
far from that, right?
It's still better than the government, though, isn't it? Still get it better than the government's targets.
Yeah, the government is another story, right? So yeah, so it's really interesting.
yeah, I look forward to big business doing perhaps even more than they have committed to. Yeah, so I switch this just to carry on talking, and then we can pass over to the Aboriginal stuff. In the geopolitical context of Australia, it's really interesting. Like, we're an English-speaking country in Asia where a lot of people speak English, but not as a first language necessarily. And so, you know, it's an interesting geopolitical thing, which Australia is involved in. You know, at our best, Australia could be like perhaps a positive balancing actor within the region, and at our worst, we could be a bit of a naive, silly guy who's getting into trouble with all sorts of things. And there's been a lot of happenings in the region recently. AUKUS, which is Australia, UK, and the US, have formed a sort of a security agreement, basically. And there's a quad security dialogue, which is Japan, Australia, India, and I think it's also the USA. And so China's doing a lot of things in a lot of different areas, like building islands in the South China Sea on reefs, and then basically building houses and putting people to live there and saying, now this is our territory, which is kind of weird and unusual and kind of aggressive, especially when it's in other countries' territorial or internationally recognized territorial areas. And in Nepal, in the Himalayas, they're doing the same kind of thing. They're going into areas, into valleys, and building buildings and putting soldiers, and essentially trying to expand their presence in the different areas. So it's a really interesting kind of context. And yeah, I'm conscious of Tachi. What are you going to share in this area before we pass on to Kim and talking about the Aboriginal side of things?
Sorry, Jeffrey, what was your question?
No, I see that this is also an area that you were interested in talking about, like in the evolutionary advantages and challenges, or evolutionary advances or challenges. Is something you wanted to contribute thoughts and reflections about anything we've talked about so far?
Yes, I just wanted to share in terms of challenges I see really in the, taking the conscientiology, main aspect, like having this in consideration. I guess for me, Australia has, in the intraphysical aspect, so many positive things. And if you are an intermissivist and you have innate ideas, you have your praxis, and you are born here or you live here, there are so many tools for you to, put these ideas into practice. I noticed that there are many NGOs are really something big here. Many people do volunteer work. They are really worried about helping the community, which is great. I don't see that much in Brazil, for example, where I come from. But I guess the big challenge is that, and I was discussing this with Sandy as well, there is this aspect of materialistic Holocene, and people really are focused on making money and have a good life. And I guess this is the main challenge for me, talking about myself, you know, to make sure, even though I am in an environment that offers many positive aspects for my existential program, that I just don't get really swallowed by this Holocene and just focus on what everyone else is doing, you know, like making money, having a good life and enjoying life and stuff like that. So I really try to be really aware of that all the time, because, and I was talking to Sandy about this, if you, if there is an intermissivist born in Australia, he or she is Australian, how do they make their innate ideas, how do they put this into practice? Do they remember this? Do they think about this in their daily lives, or do they just forget about it and live a materialistic life? So I think this is one challenge in terms of living in Australia in this context that I was discussing with Sandy and wanted to share with you guys.
Yeah, really nice. Yeah, good reflection. Yeah, the dispersion is a challenge, right?
And
Like
what did she say about it, Tatiana? Because she is Australian, right? She was born there and she's an intermissivist. What's her opinion?
Yeah, she told me she has spent, I guess, I don't remember now, over 15 years in Europe, in different countries. So for her, taking her experience in Europe into account, coming to Australia was like heaven, you know, because it's this is the good thing about Australia that Magali, Jeffrey have already talked about in terms of the energy. So it's really clean energy, immanent energy, comparing to Europe, for example. So for her, as an intermissivist, her penta, and we are going to discuss this later, right? Got really better, you know, her ideas, the actions she's taking in her life and things like that. So yeah, that's what she told me.
It's one of those challenges, isn't it? That I suppose intermissivists, we all face challenges, and then it's a matter of how much are we impacted by those challenges, and how much does it dilute the essence of the ideas and the clauses of our existential program, and manage to, you know, we manage to internally combat that and stay on track and be more productive and go deeper into our existential program, right? It's a good one, good challenge at least. And then one nice change I just want to observe, and it's a segue into Kim talking about the Aboriginal stuff, is I observed, you know, when I was here 15 years ago, or how many years ago it was, I never saw anyone really recognize the Aboriginal peoples. And now on lots of people's email footers, you know, people state, you know, I recognize and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and they have these statements, and it's on TV programs, and it's been people talking about it all over the place. And for me, that's in terms of conviviality and reconciliation and growth. It's one thing that I've observed, and I'd like to hear what Kim's got to say about the Indigenous people stuff.
Yeah, it is a nice segue, Jeff. And I think a lot of that changing has been, I mean, it's been exponential since the Black Lives Matter business and George Floyd murder and all that. That's been you've seen it really grow more so, right? But yeah, I think Australia does have you know, it's been, since I've been here, which is 21 years, there's always been acknowledgements of country, and the presence of Aboriginal people is quite tangible in the media, for example, like most newspapers, like every weekend newspaper, there'll be articles about some Indigenous issue, at conferences, at whatever, you know, public events, there'll be acknowledgements. And I did notice that it was very different when I haven't been to the US much, but when I did go, I sort of tried to connect with some of the Indigenous culture there, and also in Brazil, right? And it was much more involved. It's not just there. Like in America, there's probably the same amount of attention given to the African American community in terms of the media coverage and those kinds of things as you would get here in Australia with the Aboriginal people, but not for the Native American population there. So that's an interesting, an interesting point. And so this map here on the left, that is it's an indicative kind of a map to just give people a sense of the variety, the number of, today people often use the term nations, in the past it was tribes, speaking different languages and so on that go across the country. And there's a lot of things obviously I could say about this topic, and maybe for people who don't know me, the reason I am talking about this is because I'm an anthropologist, and I've spent the last 20 years since I've come to Australia. I've been working in the Aboriginal land rights field, and from a conscientiology, from a multidimensional point of view, it is very clear to me that was part of my existential program, and what I'm doing here in this life. Like there was many curious sort of synchronicities that led me into that field. And so I just wanted to, I thought for this presentation, there was just two topics that I wanted to talk about in terms of Indigenous people in Australia, and from thinking about it from the evolution of consciousness, and for us coming here, or anybody coming here and living with that background. And so the first one is the colonial history. Before white people came here, this country was owned by other people, as you can see on this map's an indication of that. And not in the scheme of things, really not very long ago, about 240 years on the East Coast. And in some parts of the inland, less than 100 years ago, white people rocked up and started taking over the land and removing people, killing people, locking people up, creating all across the country. There was institutions established, reserves, missions, essentially internment camps.
Agora, uma curiosidade mais saudável que a pessoa tenha isso.
And there's someone speaking in Portuguese coming in. And not only were the people displaced and killed and so on, and traumatized, but also the landscape was severely altered. And we said quite a few nice things were said about how good the quality of life is in Australia and so on, and how clean it is, and those things. And in the scheme of things, that's probably true, but especially the arid parts of the country and many of the really fragile and complex landscapes that had been maintained for thousands of years have completely altered, and many of them are very different and dead compared to how they used to be. And so the question that arose for me is, how do we come to terms with that? What as immigrants, as non-Indigenous people that haven't been involved, interestingly enough, none of us here speaking on this panel were born here, or our ancestors, were involved in these activities. But yet the repercussions are all through Australia. And you see them on the one hand in the traumatized Indigenous community, with all the effects of intergenerational trauma. And in the other side, you see it in the Australian sort of mainstream society, in a really strong level of denial of the past. So there's an interesting observation that I've made, is that speaking to other people, like people that are visiting, people that have just come from Europe or elsewhere to Australia, if I spend 20 minutes explaining the history and the experience of Aboriginal people in this country, most of them are going, oh my God, this is horrible. You know, what's going on? What are people doing about it? But if you have that same conversation with someone who was born here and whose families of Anglo-European Australian background, very often there has long been these resistances to, yeah, well, people have to move on, and you know, that was the past and we're not responsible for it. And these dynamics, I think, are really challenging and painful, but they're also valuable opportunities for our growth, because in the context of being confronted with the past, there can be either blame and resentment that we direct at what we could arguably say are the victims. And obviously there's a whole other discussion around the multidimensional group karmic relationships there. But there's the one response that we have often had, especially from conservative Australians here, which is sort of a blaming and resentfulness towards Aboriginal people. And on the other hand, the situation can guide us towards developing greater empathy, compassion, and developing skills around reconciliation, mutuality, and being responsible, taking responsibility for the past and for our role in it, and especially for how we create perhaps a different future, how we can move together. So I think those are really challenging dynamics, and in those challenges lie really big evolutionary opportunities. And then the second point I wanted to touch on is this point about Aboriginal culture being highly localized and grounded. So what I mean by that is, we were talking before about people moving about and so on, which is true. And there is this term walkabout, which is often associated with Aboriginal people. And I think early on there was this myth that Aboriginal people just walked about the landscape. You know, they just, one moment they were here and then they were somewhere else. And while it's true that people were mobile, and especially in the desert areas, people were often very mobile because water, there was lots of, you had to go with where the water was, and sometimes it was 200 kilometers down that way and didn't come up where you happened to be at that point. But people didn't just walk around aimlessly or just randomly through the country. It was within clearly defined areas where they had rights to be, and they didn't have people didn't have rights to be everywhere because land was owned. And people have this very intricate knowledge and understanding of their country, their particular area of land. So there isn't a concept of Australia in Aboriginal culture. There isn't a sense of commonality of we're all Australians or this is all one place. People talk about their country, their patch, their part of the river, their mountains, whatever it is that belongs to their family and them. And so on the one hand, that could be quite, in a sense, parochial, right? It's very narrow focus. You're confined to a small community of people and a small area of land. But on the other hand, there's underlying this is a worldview and a multidimensional perspective, because Aboriginal culture is fundamentally multidimensional, where the extraphysical side of life plays a really important role. And so when I was thinking about that, there are these two binomials that occur to me. So the first one is the binomial universalism, localism. So the localism is the part I spoke to. The universalism is that people assume, Aboriginal people assume that what applies in their country will apply in another country as well. So for example, everything is created by extraphysical consciousness, often called creation ancestors in anthropology or Aboriginal sort of discourse. And within your own country, you have a solid understanding of what created the spring, what created the mountain. There's the stories about how that happened. And we don't have time for this, but there's some fascinating geological correlations between these stories that seem like mythical stories, but there's actually measurable evidence in the geology and other factors and so on. But if you're if you're in someone else's country, you don't know the stories, but you're still assuming that the same principles apply, and you look for them and you try to find them. And so working with Aboriginal people, I've been told more than once that what I should really do is to go back to my country and find out about my ancestors and where they came from and what their stories are, because obviously, you know, in Germany, where my ancestors are from, I also must have those stories. And that has really shifted the perspective that I now have of country anywhere. Actually, if I go around in Europe or in the Americas, there's the bigger focus on what's right in front of us locally, but with this overarching perspective. And similar, sort of related to that, this binomial of diversity and commonality. So if you look at this map here, it's kind of drawn a bit like a European, like you would imagine a European map, like different nations, right? And it's useful as an illustration, but it's actually inaccurate because people didn't really think in those terms. People didn't really think like we're all like this and that knob over there are all like someone else. Aboriginal people were actually incredibly comfortable to live with diversity and to find commonality within diversity. So polyglottism was very high. It was very common for people to speak 5, 6, or 7 different languages. And people from different languages would come together, would live together, would intermarry, would do ceremonies together. And so within the diversity, people can identify the commonality. So there's a very, and again, we don't really have time to go into that, but there is this constant interplay in Aboriginal culture between difference and the same, and how that can work together. And all of that, just to finish up, because I'm almost out of time, all of that, interestingly, without any hierarchical structures. So it was a very decentralized kind of way of working together socially. And I have a sense that this is something that in some way, in an evolved sort of future way, is something that we might be heading back to as a humanity as we break out of the whole idea of nation states and nationalism and all that, and find different ways of living together. All right, that's me.
So this one is for Margie and Tachi and Mashiko, yeah? Go ahead, girls.
I just want to do some correlation with what the Holocene is here. Like we saw before, I think in self-research, in self-recycling, most of the Holocene help us, at least me, my experience, but let's see what the girls has to say, but help us to, in certain way. Like the Holocene here about food, you know, that I could experience really people, how they take care of their health, and also how they are with the animals and with life. So we had really good examples close to us. So I changed my way of eating because I had good examples close to me. So also another relation with in the beginning that we are saying that also how Australia rank in each of those things. Also assistance. Here has a lot of volunteering. So I could quickly be a volunteer in the society. because they have like portals where you can choose whatever you want to do as a volunteer. So zoo conviviality. I also learned more because we used to have animals in Brazil, and I'm having animals here, and I don't know, I don't know, then we, in the discussion, we can see with the Jeffrey, if Jeffrey wants to comment too, but it's like our conviviality with animals here is different. It's more about the nature. We go outside, the animals play with the dogs of our neighbors. It's totally different. It's for us, it's like cats playing with dogs in the street, you know, like it's not dogs that is in the same house. It's dog that is not in our house, it's outside. So it's different. And also conviviality, as Tati said, they have this high education and also sensibility of listen, not interrupt, and be careful with other people. And so that also, I think, is something I see that I'm improving a little bit still, but I see that that is impacting me. It's impacting me in a way that make me want to be different, you know, and improve those things. So about self-organization, I don't know if it's the Holocene of here, but since I came from Brazil till now, I never stopped to volunteer or working. Never, not even in, you know, we came here in December and we still were volunteer with Michico, Fernandez, Jeffrey, we are doing things. And yeah, I think the Holocene helped also a lot. Even if there is a sport and lots of things that you can do outside, it's not a distraction. It's not a, how can I say, in my experience, is not a place that make you be, you know, like, how is the word, disperse? That would be the word, disperse. I don't feel that here. So challenge. What I see is that Australia go around and they are so, they live intense because there is lots of things to do. Even the animals has lots of things to do. We have lots of things to do in terms of going around and experience other things. And I think that make us life more dangerous if you don't take care of yourself, because you live, you have more experience, different type of experience. So the challenge here, right? The challenge of, I have lots of challenge, that is good, but it's also make me see that health, I think in a health way, we can see that, yeah, like Australian, they do a lot of sports, and that is good. And so they eat well. So all that impact our life positively. I think that is what I can share about recycle in my experience.
Yeah, so I just, for me, I just wanted to really connect the dots between, you know, what Magali said in the beginning with explaining the Holocaust and Tatiana as well, the Holocaust of Australia, and how there are a lot of factors, right, intraphysical, extraphysical factors that are propitious to maximizing your self-research and self-recycling. That's what I found, and I couldn't think of a better word than when I came here. It was like a sense of quietude, like there, and I don't know if it has to do with really all of those factors, and plus the vastness that I feel here in Australia. It's just, you know, like Tatiana said, everything's big, the energy is big, right? So I found that there was that space where you could focus, or I could focus personally more deeply on self-research and really question whether, you know, the work I was doing and the things, the activities I was doing was really aligned or maximizing my proexis. So, you know, from that, I had the opportunity to really assess that and for myself decide, okay, this is not the direction that is really going to maximize my proexis. So I shifted and went back to pursue further graduate studies. But, you know, I felt like I had that space here because of all those different factors that we talked about. And then the other thing about the Holothosine of Australia that Fernandez and I always talk about is the extremity of it here in Australia. So especially here in South Australia, you know, it could be 8 degrees one day, and then the next day it'll be, you know, 40 degrees. So it's, you know, we're switching between taking out our winter blankets and then the next day we're taking out our summer quilts, you know. So that extremity, I think once you can kind of get accustomed to it and not, I suppose, go against the flow of it, you can really take advantage of that extremes, I think. So for example, for me personally, I was able to, while things are quite quiet in a sense, that I could focus and work and really leverage and work on my strong traits of worth ethics and discipline and evolutionary focus and so forth. My weak traits were also very, very apparent and very strong. And that was an opportunity for me to see those two extremes and to be able to work on those traits as well. So I saw that as a real opportunity in self-recycling.
Okay, so I can go ahead now, I guess. So for me, in terms of self-research and recycling, there are some aspects. The first one, just like Michiko, in terms of the traits. So if I see my conscientiogram today, it is totally different from the conscientiogram I had when I was in Brazil. So some traits I thought were awesome, wonderful, perfect. When I left the environment I was at Cognopolis and I came to Australia, my experience, my challenges, my everyday life showed me that they were not that good as I thought. On the other hand, there were some traits that I didn't even know I had, strong traits. And in this environment, they came up and they manifested, and I was like, what the hell is this? I didn't know I was able to do that, so much stuff, so much overcoming in that I just didn't have the chance to do while in Brazil. So this was, I guess, one aspect in terms of self-research. The environment connected to my relation, my multi-millennial relation to this Holothosine made my traits, you know, show up in a different way. Some that I didn't know I had, others that I thought were great and they are not actually that good. And this is really interesting because I have a more realistic understanding of myself in terms of, you know, self-research than I used to do actually in Brazil. So that's really interesting. Second aspect, in terms of health, I agree with Magali. The Holothosine here is really strong in terms of taking care of your health and much easier as well. So I did become more, I do exercise basically regularly, and I didn't used to do that in Brazil. You know, the food, it's much easier for me to find healthy food to eat here than in Brazil, with not chemicals, you know, organic stuff with a good price. So this helps a lot as well. Another point of self-recycling for me, Australia has many rules for everything. So guidelines, you know, things that you need to follow, which I think it's amazing. I love it. Some Brazilians don't like it because we are really, you know, it cuts our flexibility sometimes, but I love it. And people are on time. If they promise something, they actually do it. Children learn how to be polite, how to say thank you, how to respect people, how to recycle, you know, what goes in that bin, what goes in this bin. You go to the supermarket and you have to take your own bag, because otherwise you have to buy a bag if you don't do it, if you don't take it. So this is sort of like a re-education, and which is really interesting, because you imagine a Brazilian, you know, with all the Holocene of being flexible, of doing whatever you can anytime, and everyone, you know, sort of being, you know, not really criticizing you if you do something wrong. And here, if your neighbor sees you parking in the wrong place, they will tell the, you know, the management right away. If you do something wrong, there is no excuse. And this is really, I love it, actually. It's really interesting, but it has been a challenge for me as well. And the last thing I wanted to highlight in terms of recycling and self-research is, as an intermissivist here in Australia, I had, because in Brazil, we had all the, you know, the cognopolies, all the structure that really helped me experience and put my ideas into practice. You know, we have all the, you know, CIEC and all the international, the institutions to help me, you know, put my ideas into practice. Here, I had the challenge to find new ways to create impact with my ideas, with my energies, with my Holocene, with my innate ideas wherever I go, but in a different way. Because to build rapport with people, it's different. It's another culture. It's they don't know what your background is. When I moved to Australia, I was just no one. So no one knows my background. So that's really interesting. And the challenge is to make the ideas, my innate ideas, have a life here by building rapport with other people that don't even know where I come from. That's it.
Thanks, Tachi. That's really interesting observations, everyone. I enjoyed that. The next slide, Michiko, do you want to just kick off? I know we're getting a little bit squeezed on time, so maybe we can run through this more quickly, but see how you go. Michiko, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so what I wanted to say about this, about my experience, I actually started doing Penta here in Australia after I moved to Australia. And that was a really interesting experience for me. Magali and I had already been working on the Bridge Book Club since last year, and Kim had joined, Kim and Fernandez, and I had also already been doing some energetic work consistently every fortnight together. So, you know, we were already establishing a lot of connections here to to the extra physical and with helpers. So I think Penta for me started kind of organically from that. And so what I noticed is that it was quite impactful for me in terms of I started to have perceptions of my group karma here, and particularly in the workplace, because I used to always question myself, why am I here? Why am I working here in these companies? And it became really, really apparent after I started doing Penta. And I would even have some retrocognitive experiences with certain members of the group, you know, that would bring some light into the dynamics and the patterns that we continue to be involved in. And it also brought a lot of opportunities for reconciliation and opportunities to do things differently and to provide assistance and develop in my assistance. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say about my Penta experience here. Thanks, Jeff.
Cheers, Mashiko. Yeah, and for me, I mean, I started Penta here in Australia, like Mashiko, but I started in 2004 or 2003, something like that. But coming back here a few years ago, as Margaret and I moved back here, it's been interesting, and I dare say a little bit of a refresh on many regards. Much more focus on like pre-Penta. I'm using a little device now that measures random number generators. So lots of people laugh at me when I talk about this. They say, what? But it's a little device that generates random numbers, and you can see trends over time and different movements. And so I'm doing that for every Penta session, but I have to start at about 10 minutes before Penta. So I used to just rock up to Penta and start. But now I'm connecting with it more and thinking about it a little bit more and trying to reflect in different ways. And I think it's getting even broader than it has been previously. Obviously, where I am physically, the location and the connections I have is really interesting. I'm working for the same company I was working for when I lived in Australia previously, but the role is very different now, and I have a lot more connections with a lot broader range of people and companies geographically as well. So a lot in Singapore, some even in the Middle East still, but obviously a lot in Australia and New Zealand. So it's interesting. And funnily enough, my old boss and other colleagues, a few of us left the company or moved to different areas and so on. And then we've all sort of reunited again. So it's sort of been quite weird process happening there. And then there's other things that are continuing in terms of connections with Africa and other flows and initiatives and projects as well are obviously playing a role there. But that's all I had to say. João, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Hi, guys. Well, I would like to share my experience when I came to Australia and to understand deeper why I'm doing here in my extension program. And that's why I start to realize that I start to have this kind of connection with indigenous peoples. And because I start to understand, because due to the colonization, there's a huge demand from those extra physical consciousness. So I start to study more about the history of Australia, and yeah, is a long process that somehow we can help them, because it's very impacted from those people who died from the colonization. And I would like to make a relation with Australian nature. As many people said before, I can feel this huge immanent energy, because when you wake up, you can hear the birds and many trees, parks. So and we can understand how we can create a connection with this kind of energy, and somehow we can help this extra physical consciousness. And I believe these Aboriginal people have a strong connection with the nature. That's why I would like to understand better this kind of relation. And the last topic is about the extra-physical reurbanization, because based on our knowledge, we can help little by little on a regular basis and donate our energy and make a difference during this moment in our life in Australia. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Ron. The next slide is about projects, and it's over to Magali and Michiko.
I think we can skip that and let it for the discussion. I don't know if Michiko wants to talk a little bit about that. Michiko, maybe you?
Yeah, I think most people here have either participated in the Bridge Book Club, so there's not much really to add, but I think that, again, Australia's Holothosine of openness is a good place to kind of base the coordination of the Bridge Book Club. And then particularly, it was an important event during the COVID pandemic, in terms of bridging intermissivists and self-researchers and so forth. So yeah, that's all really I wanted to say about that. Thanks, Magali.
Too easy. So I think now there's a something of a question session. So anyone feel free to ping us your questions, and Virginia, if you want to coordinate this part, please feel free to.
So, is there any question? It was very interesting, the presentation. Congrats. Is there anyone who would like to know more about their experience? They were very rich. Interesting that there's no anyone native from Australia, but they are in this area. So
I did wonder whether that has any is any reflection on this, something about the concept of conscientiology, being picked up in this country. I mean, Jeff more so than me, but we were both involved in organizing courses here for a few years, and I think it was always a bit of a, it's like kind of a bit like herding cats or something, wasn't it, to get a community together?
Yeah, I think it's typically quite hard for native people to access conscientiology in their home environment, so to speak, because their life is already full of stuff. They're already doing this, that, the next thing. They're working hard. They're taking care of family. They've got all those ties and connections that are already established in their life. And I think it's seems to be very hard for people to branch off and do different things. But having said that, I think this is an interesting thing for us to consider, and the idea of exemplarism, I think, comes very much to the fore here, because if you present something very jarring to people, they're going to be very adverse to it. But if you just in conversations naturally talk about things, like I've spoken to one neighbor about thocenes, like, no, there's this just naturally in the conversation, there's this idea about, people always producing thoughts and emotions and energies and this and that, and then we talked about how things flowed from there. So it was just a natural inclusion of that. And the other neighbors we speak to about out-of-body experiences, and he's seen UFOs around here and stuff. And so I think where conscientiology will grow, I think, is when we get better at as opposed to trying to emphasize how different it is emphasize just how natural it is and how normal it is and how it can just be integrated very naturally and maturely into things. And that, I think, allows people to engage with it in a way like that. So I sort of see it very much in that regard, but it's a really interesting line of thought, Kim.
Yeah. About our neighbors, is really fun because we have lots of neighbors. It's like 4 that is like we talk about all these things, but there is more. And they really have a normal life, like, and you wouldn't say that they are these people about, you know, parapsychism and everything. And so I was talking to other people, not the same that Jeffrey said, and it's a couple, and they were talking about, and then I started to talk about SEAEC and how was things in SEAEC. And they were so interesting about that. And I said, yeah, I'll send you pictures, send you things. I haven't sent it yet because they came to our house and they have this chat, and they are so much have ideas of energy, ideas of reincarnation and all these things. So seems something natural in our street. And I don't know if we just jump into this street here.
Yeah,
and
if we
I
got
don't know
lucky, or if it was just
what is happening, and I don't know how. Actually, I don't know how is the best introduction of conscientiology. I think we probably have to see the way of doing that in a natural, like Jeffrey saying, or maybe just to people assess the knowledge, because we are not, you know, here to convince anyone, but give access to the knowledge in a good way, you know. That I think is a challenge.
I wonder if Fernandez and his video
Exactly.
video things has anything to say around what he thinks we might be able to do in terms of or what's a good approach with doing that. Any thoughts,
Okay.
Fernandez? Or
Yeah, for me, what happens is what I naturally talk about those things in those terms because for me it's so natural to my life. But I guess that you perceive the person's reaction if the person is open or not to that. And when I see that there is an opportunity to keep talking about it, and not necessarily you need to use the terminology, you know, the neologism or whatever, but just transmit the idea. And I can say that I find a lot of people open to it, but there is always someone interested on the topic at a workplace or school or whatever. No, there's always someone that, oh, you have such a different view of the world, or you know, like there's always someone interested.
and an interesting thing around our responsibility for things. Like I was in the dentist chair the other day, and we were chatting about something. I was watching The Mind Explained or something on Netflix on the TV screen on the top of the ceiling. And they're saying, oh, what, and we're discussing about what was being spoken about. And I was given a few other different ideas associated, you know, conscientiological things, but in a natural way. And they're saying, oh, it's so nice to hear someone who can talk about these things. You know, so like we are all able to talk about these things. We all have knowledge and experiences and abilities, and perhaps we just exercise that perhaps even a little bit more and more as we have the opportunities going forward in life.
Jeffrey, yeah, I was thinking that I think there's no a unique formula to access intermissivists. You know, you need to do something and then you are going to receive the feedbacks. But I was wondering, do you think, you all think that there will be a movement that more Brazilians will move to Australia or not? Or it's something that is going to be is going to appear more intermissivists in Australia to do the work? What do you think that is the perspective? What are the if someone would like to help you, what are the things that they can do in order to help you as a group in Australia? We can do something here in other parts of the world, or what do you think about it?
Yeah, look, I think I don't know how many Brazilians will come to Australia. I think Brazilians like Australia and probably do want to come here in a lot of cases, but to live and just do it, I think it shouldn't be anything forced. I think it should be a natural part of that person's existential program and life sort of trajectory, and that would be more of a successful thing. but it's completely up to individuals. And in terms of future projects that will happen here, who knows? I think we're just open to it. I think we're just all establishing ourselves in different ways and sort of experimenting in our own way what we think will work. And just the focus is more on that at the moment. And then let's sort of see where I suppose we can add value and improve things. And in terms of other people helping, Magali and Mashiko, maybe with the bridges, things they can do there. But other projects I think are on in the wings, consciousness hubs and things like that. Those ideas are just in the air, but nothing moving yet. So I don't know. Anyone else have any other thoughts there, please?
I like the sound of a consciousness hub. What's a consciousness hub?
Yes. I feel that, well, there are many Brazilians in Australia already, okay? I don't know how many of them are intermissivists, but man, there are some places that you just listen people speaking Portuguese. So there are many Brazilians everywhere here. I guess now, especially after COVID and the pandemic, I feel that we are just able to do so much stuff online, and it's just a matter of organizing, you know. I don't feel at the moment that we are in the steps of having something intraphysical here. That's my opinion. And we can access anyone and everyone online, just like we are doing now. So you're right there in Brazil, in Foz, we are here, we are discussing together, we are adding each one here in Australia in different places, giving their contribution. This is going to be recorded. People are going to be accessing this forever. And it's even more interesting than in intraphysical event, for example, a congress, that you have 2 or 3 days and 200 people go there. It's great, it's amazing, it's awesome, but then no one else is able to access that information, you know? So I guess this is a new way of making these ideas come to the intermissivists wherever they are. And I believe that what people can do to help us is writing books in English, writing accessible information, articles, videos for people who don't know conscientiology. So this is something very interesting and important, because we are in, when I was in Foz, I had a different understanding of how people overseas or in different countries would access conscientiology. Now it's more clear because I live here. And I see that we have so much important and relevant information, you know, in the institutions, in the groups, and specialists. And if they can work on materials, written, videos, articles, and whatever, live events, to spread these ideas in a more simple way, this would definitely help. And this is a challenge for us, because especially us in Foz, we are like doing a lot of deep scientific research. So I totally understand that. But you asked the question, so that I'm answering your question. So I guess that's it.
So just a comment in the,
yes,
just a little comment in the Tati's ones. Yeah, if I know that we have lots of materials in CIEC and other things, but Virginia, if you could send or separate some materials that you really think it's good to pass on for people, would be nice. You know, the best materials we have. Good, thank you, Lily. Yeah.
Following what Tatiana is saying, among the several projects that we have under the Bridge umbrella, one of them is exactly the bridge writers, which the idea that came to me from the extra-physical is exactly to start motivating people to write conscientiology in English and other languages, but to start in English. So actually all presentations, including Tatiana is there as well, right? All presentations in the bridge writers, they are actually master classes about, you know, lots of important information to help the interdisciplinaries all over the world to start writing in English. And also, I'm trying to do this movement, you know, in the partnership with Union School. I'm doing immersion in writing with them. And we are starting to write our books in English. Me, obviously, Jacqueline Cowan is writing the book in English, obviously. I'm writing my book in English. Ligia Becker is writing her book in English. And we it's the beginning, right? I see it as a beginning. The project has been on for 3 years now. Next year will be the third year, the third leg of this thing. But the idea is exactly opening doors and opening windows and trying to engage more authors, more people from ISIC. There's also the good news, I think, that there's more people here now speaking English. People are having classes in English, they are brushing their English to do even their presentations for the British writers. Like, for instance, this year we have Tatiana started right here, and then we have Luciana Labor, Diana Rossa, Jan Koens. We will still have now in December on the 26th, we will have Pedro Fernandes. So it's been a year very much into you know, for interdisciplinaries, you know, from interdisciplinaries, for interdisciplinaries, and lots of information about conscientiology, right?
Thanks, Lily.
About a number of things. So I think this goes in you know, in the sequence of what Tatiana was saying.
Yeah,
I think it's very important. Yeah, a next step, people writing in English.
I agree totally. Thank you. But I think another very important thing is to connect, to understand more Australian culture, to connect with the Holocaust scene, to interact with our evolutionary friends here in Australia. I know that it's a challenge because the hour is so, the timeline is so different. But I think to be connected, I think this can help a lot. I think in the contribution of all of us. So, any question? What do you think about it? Anyone would like to say the final words to this conference or debate discussion?
No,
Yeah,
just a thank you really for it, and just thank you to all the presenters as well. Like, I really enjoyed listening to all your thoughts and ideas, and everyone who contributed in any way. So, and everyone who's watching, thanks.
So we thank you all for your participation. I think it was great. Now we know more about the things that are happening in Australia. So thank you. We are sending the best energy to that you can develop all your projects. So thank you so much, and thank you for all the participants that today were here with us. So thank you, and see you. Bye bye.
See everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye bye.
Nice
Nice to see you.
Missing some time.